There are moments in life when the ground beneath your feet shifts, and you realize that everything you believed was solid was actually built on quicksand. I'm 74 years old, and I thought I'd seen enough to weather any storm. But standing on those familiar front steps, clutching a hand-embroidered gift that had taken me 3 months to complete, I felt like a child again, unwanted, invisible, forgotten. The house looked the same as it had 37 years ago, when Harold and I first planted roses by the front gate. The same oak tree where my grandchildren used to swing. The same porch where I'd served lemonade on summer afternoons. But the faces looking back at me through the window weren't filled with the warmth I remembered. They were filled with something else, entirely. What I didn't know that day was that beneath the garden I'd helped plant with my own hands lay something that would change everything. A secret that had been waiting patiently in the dark, like seeds in winter soil, ready to bloom when the time was right. Before I share what happened next, I want you to know that these stories, these pieces of my heart, they matter to me. If they matter to you too, please subscribe and ring that little bell. There are so many of us carrying untold stories, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey with me. I adjusted my pearl necklace, the one Harold gave me our first Christmas together, and took a deep breath before walking up that stone pathway. The garden was in full bloom, exactly as I'd taught my daughter-in-law to maintain it all those years ago. White roses climbed the trellis, jasmine perfumed the evening air, and the fountain Harold had installed bubbled softly in the corner. Every step felt like walking through a museum of my own life. The front door was decorated with ivory ribbons and baby's breath. Through the glass panels, I could see my family gathered in the living room, where I'd hosted countless Sunday dinners. My son David stood near the fireplace, the same spot where he'd opened Christmas presents as a boy. My daughter-in-law Margaret was arranging flowers, the crystal vase I'd given her for their 10th anniversary. I knocked gently, the way I always had. No answer. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, someone playing piano. My old upright piano that I'd left behind when I moved to the smaller house. The sounds of celebration, of family, of joy, all the sounds that used to include me. I knocked again, a little louder this time. The door opened, but instead of my son or daughter-in-law, a young woman I didn't recognize appeared. She was beautiful, probably in her 20s, wearing a flowing white dress that caught the porch light like silk. Her smile faltered the moment she saw me. I watched her eyes dart nervously over my shoulder, as if she were looking for someone to rescue her. "Oh," she said, and her voice carried a tone I'd heard before, the same tone Margaret used when she wanted me to leave early from family gatherings. The girl twisted her engagement ring, a ring I didn't recognize but somehow knew was expensive. They said. Behind her I could see my granddaughter Emily adjusting white flowers in that crystal vase. The same Emily who used to run into my arms and call me her favorite grandma in the whole wide world. She glanced toward the door, saw me standing there, and quickly looked away. Her face told me everything I needed to know about why I hadn't received an invitation to what was clearly her engagement party. But what happened next would make that moment of rejection feel like a gentle breeze compared to the storm that was coming. The young woman at the door shifted uncomfortably, her manicured fingers gripping the doorframe. Mrs. Penrose, they said—" She paused, swallowed hard, then spoke the words that would echo in my mind for days. "They said not to let you in, that you'd ruin the photos." Her cheeks flushed red as she said it, as if the cruelty of the words burned her tongue. I felt the hand-embroidered gift grow heavy in my arms. 3 months I'd spent on this tablecloth, working by lamplight when my arthritis allowed, stitching each family name with gold thread. Emily Rose Penrose, I'd embroidered in flowing script, surrounded by the family tree. Harold's name, mine, David's, Margaret's, even the names of cousins and aunts. A legacy wrapped in linen. Through the window I could see Margaret directing guests toward the dining room. She wore a navy dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in a way that made her look younger, more elegant. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of a hostess in her own home, which I suddenly realized is exactly what she'd become. This wasn't just Emily's engagement party. This was Margaret claiming her territory. My son David appeared in the hallway behind the girl. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, guilt, something that might have been pain. But not the kind of pain that moves you to action. The kind that makes you stand still and hope the problem goes away. He mouthed something to the girl, who nodded and stepped back slightly. "Mom," he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. This isn't a good time." Behind him, I could see Emily arranging white roses, the same roses I'd planted when she was born, the ones I'd carefully cultivated and pruned for years. They'd never bloomed more beautifully than they did that night, and I wasn't welcome to see them. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, holding my gift, wearing my best dress, feeling like an intruder in the life I'd helped build. The sounds of celebration continued behind them. My family, my piano, my roses, my crystal vase, everything that was mine, except the invitation to be part of it. But as I turned to leave, walking carefully down those stone steps I'd helped Harold install decades ago, I carried with me something they'd forgotten I possessed. Something that had been waiting underground all these years, patient as a seed in winter. I sat in my car for a long time, parked across the street under the old maple tree where Harold and I used to sit on summer evenings. The house glowed with warm light, and through the windows I could see my family celebrating. Someone had moved the party to the back garden, my garden, where string lights now hung between the trees I'd planted. The sight should have filled me with joy, but instead it felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. The tablecloth sat beside me on the passenger seat, wrapped in tissue paper that now seemed pitifully optimistic. I traced the embroidered names with my finger, each stitch a prayer I'd whispered for this family's happiness. Harold James Penrose, I'd sewn in memory thread, the silver kind that catches light. Even in death, I'd included him in this celebration that I'd apparently been excluded from in life. As I watched, Emily emerged from the house wearing a different dress, a flowing cream gown that I'd never seen, but somehow looked familiar. She moved through the garden with the grace of a young woman in love, her fiancé's hand in hers. Stopping to greet guests by the fountain Harold had installed for our 25th anniversary, the fountain where Emily had thrown pennies and made wishes as a little girl. Margaret appeared beside her, and I watched as my daughter-in-law whispered something in Emily's ear. Emily nodded, glanced toward the street where my car was parked, and then quickly looked away. In that moment, I understood that this exclusion wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, discussed, decided upon in conversations I'd never been part of. They'd chosen to celebrate without me, as if 37 years of love and devotion could be erased with a single decision. I started the engine, but instead of driving home to my small apartment with its single window and borrowed furniture, I found myself driving to the old cemetery where Harold rested. Under the starlight, sitting beside his headstone, I made a decision that would change everything. Not a decision born of anger or revenge, but of something deeper, the quiet determination of a woman who'd spent too many years being patient. Tomorrow I would begin digging up the past, and some secrets refused to stay buried forever. The next morning I stood in my kitchen making coffee in the chipped mug Emily had painted for me in 2nd grade. "World's Best Grandma," in crooked purple letters. The morning light streaming through my small window felt different, somehow, charged with possibility. I'd barely slept, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. Sometimes rejection is exactly the push you need to remember who you really are. I opened the old cedar chest Harold had built for our 1st anniversary. Beneath layers of tissue paper and lavender sachets lay the things I'd saved. Not just photographs and letters, but documents. Real documents. The original deed to the house, with Harold's father's name alongside mine. The handwritten agreement between Harold's father and Margaret's father, witnessed by 2 neighbors, detailing the terms of the property transfer that had never been legally recorded. But the most important items were at the bottom of the chest, wrapped in oilcloth. The cassette tapes, dozens of them, labeled in Harold's careful handwriting. Edith and Me, Building the Garden, 1987. Property Discussions with Jim Patterson, 1988. Family History Project, 1989. Harold had been meticulous about recording our life together, especially the conversations about the house, the land, and the promises that had been made. I held one tape up to the light, remembering Harold's voice explaining to Margaret's father exactly what the arrangement would be. As long as Edith is alive, this is her home too. We're not just giving you property, Jim. We're giving you family history. Jim Patterson had agreed, shaking Harold's hand while the tape recorder sat unnoticed on the kitchen counter. Men of their generation sealed deals with handshakes, but Harold had always been careful about details. The tapes weren't just memories, they were evidence. Evidence of promises made, agreements reached, and an understanding that had apparently been forgotten the moment Harold died. I loaded the first tape into my old cassette player, and Harold's voice filled my tiny kitchen, warm and alive, discussing plans for the garden with his characteristic attention to detail. As I listened to my husband's voice from beyond the grave, I realized he'd left me something more valuable than any will or testament. I spent the morning organizing everything Harold had saved. Photographs, showing me designing and planting the garden, receipts for materials I'd purchased with my own money, even a small notebook where I'd sketched the layout of every flower bed. The evidence painted a clear picture. I hadn't just lived in that house, I'd created it. Every rose bush, every stone pathway, every carefully planned sightline had been my vision, my work, my love made manifest. The photograph that made me pause longest was from Emily's 3rd birthday party. There I was, kneeling in dirt-stained gardening clothes, showing her how to plant bulbs near the fountain. Emily's tiny hands were covered in soil, her face bright with concentration as I guided her fingers. In the background, barely visible but clearly there, Margaret stood watching from the porch, with an expression I'd never noticed before. Not gratitude, but something that looked almost like resentment. I made copies of everything at the library, the young librarian treating me with the kind, gentle patience usually reserved for elderly people doing mysterious tasks. She didn't ask questions when I requested help with the cassette-to-digital conversion service, just smiled and said it would take a few days. I thanked her, remembering when being helpful to family didn't require payment or explanations. That afternoon I drove slowly past the house. The engagement party decorations were gone, but the garden looked magnificent. My roses climbed the trellis with the same vigor they'd shown for decades. The jasmine I'd trained around the front gate perfumed the air for the entire block. Even from the street I could see that someone had been maintaining everything, exactly as I'd taught them. Probably Margaret, though she'd never once thanked me for the lesson. As I sat there, Emily's car pulled into the driveway. She got out slowly, as if the weight of last night's celebration had left her tired. For a moment, she looked directly at my car, and I thought she might walk over. Instead, she hurried inside, but not before I saw something in her expression that gave me hope. Guilt has a particular look, and Emily wore it like an uncomfortable dress. The seeds of change had been planted, and sometimes the most patient gardener is the one who gets to see the most beautiful blooms. 3 days later, my nephew Robert called, Harold's sister's boy, now a successful lawyer in the next county. "Aunt Edith," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "I've been going through some of Uncle Harold's old files for the estate documentation. You need to see what I found." His voice carried the tone of someone who'd discovered treasure, which, in a way, he had. Robert arrived that evening with a manila folder thick with documents I'd never seen. "Uncle Harold was more thorough than any lawyer I know," he said, spreading papers across my small dining table. "Look at this. He registered a life estate agreement with the county recorder's office. Edith, legally speaking, you have the right to live in that house until you die, regardless of who holds the title deed." I stared at the papers, Harold's careful signature on every page, my name listed as the life estate holder. "I don't understand," I said. "Margaret never mentioned any of this when Harold died. She said the house was David's now, and wouldn't it be easier if I moved somewhere smaller?" The implications of what Robert was showing me began to sink in like water into dry earth. "Aunt Edith," Robert said gently, "they legally cannot exclude you from family gatherings in that house. They can't change the gardens without your permission. Hell, they can't even refinance the property without your signature." He pulled out another document, a quitclaim deed that I'd apparently signed 3 years ago, believing it was insurance paperwork. "But this changes things. They had you sign away your rights without telling you what you were signing." The room felt smaller suddenly, filled with the weight of betrayal. Not just the exclusion from Emily's party, but years of subtle manipulation, of being gradually edged out of my own life. I thought about all the times Margaret had suggested I might be more comfortable somewhere else. All the family decisions made without consulting me. All the ways I'd been made to feel like a guest in my own home. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "The question is, Aunt Edith, what do you want to do about it?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, like an invitation, like the first note of a song I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. But what I wanted wasn't revenge. It was something far more powerful than that. I spent the next week walking through my memories like rooms in a house I'd forgotten I owned. Each cassette tape revealed another layer of the life Harold and I had built together. His voice describing his plans for our retirement. "Edith will want to keep gardening until she's 90. This place will be her sanctuary." My own voice, younger but recognizable, laughing as I described my vision for the rose garden. "I want Emily's children to play here someday. I want this to be a place where family gatherings happen naturally." The most revealing recording was from a Sunday dinner conversation, apparently recorded by accident, when Harold forgot to turn off the machine. Margaret's voice clear as day. "It's just that she's so involved in everything. Sometimes I feel like a guest in my own home." David's response was gentle but telling. "She loves this place, Margaret, and she loves us. Can't we find a way to make it work?" Margaret's laugh had an edge to it. "Oh, we'll make it work. Just give me time." Listening to that conversation felt like watching my life from the outside, seeing the slow erosion of my place in the family with startling clarity. It hadn't been sudden. It had been gradual, careful, orchestrated with the kind of patience that only comes from knowing exactly what you want to achieve. Margaret had wanted me gone, and she'd been willing to wait years to make it happen. But as I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life they'd tried to erase, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. My own power. Not the power to hurt them, but the power to choose my own story. I could spend the rest of my life feeling sorry for myself, or I could remind them of something they'd apparently forgotten, that I was still here, still breathing, still part of this family, whether they found it convenient or not. Emily called that Thursday evening. Her voice was small, uncertain. "Grandma Edith, could we talk? I mean, could I come see you?" The hope in my chest was so sudden and fierce, it almost took my breath away. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "I'll make tea." When Emily arrived at my door 2 hours later, she carried with her something I'd given up hope of ever seeing again. Emily stood in my doorway holding a small wooden box I recognized immediately. The memory box I'd made for her 8th birthday, filled with photographs and letters from her childhood. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched the box like it contained something precious and fragile. "Grandma," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "I found this in my closet and I remembered things." We sat at my tiny kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework and taught her to knead bread. She opened the box with trembling fingers, revealing photographs I'd forgotten existed. Emily and me planting bulbs, Emily learning to prune roses, Emily helping me arrange flowers for her parents' anniversary party. In every photo we were laughing, working together, completely absorbed in each other's company. "I remember this," she said, holding up a picture of us building a fairy garden in a corner of the backyard. "You told me that if I was very quiet and very patient, I might see the fairies come to dance at midnight. I believed you completely." Her smile was watery but genuine. "I used to sneak out of bed and watch from my window, hoping to catch them. The box contained more than photographs. There were letters I'd written to her when she was too young to read, meant to be opened when she was older. Letters about family history, about the importance of roots, about the garden as a living testament to love and patience. Emily held one up. To my granddaughter on her wedding day. From the woman who will love her forever. Even from heaven if necessary. Mom said you weren't invited because you and she had argued about money, about the house. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. She said you demanded part of the inheritance, and that Dad was hurt. She made it sound like you were being selfish. The words hung between us like smoke, bitter and choking. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. They were soft, unmarked by the kind of work that builds character, but they were still the hands of the little girl who'd helped me plant hope in the ground. Emily, I said, let me tell you the real story. And for the first time in 3 years, I told the complete truth about everything. The truth poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I told Emily about the life estate agreement, about the recordings, about the quit-claim deed I'd signed without understanding. I showed her the photographs of me building the garden, the receipts for materials I'd bought with my own savings, the detailed notes about every plant choice and design decision. Most importantly, I played her Harold's voice, explaining his vision for our family's future. Your grandfather wanted that house to be a gathering place for generations, I said, watching Emily's face change as she absorbed the implications. He specifically wanted to ensure that I would always have a place there, that family celebrations would always include the people who'd invested their lives in creating that space. Harold's voice from the cassette player seemed to fill the room. This isn't just about property. This is about making sure family means something real. Emily's hands shook as she held the photographs. Grandma, if this is all true, if you legally have rights to the house, why didn't you say something? Why did you just leave? Her question cut straight to the heart of my shame. My years of choosing peace over truth, harmony over my own dignity, because I thought family was more important than being right, I said, because I believed that love meant sacrificing your own needs for everyone else's comfort, because I was tired, Emily, tired of fighting for space in my own life. The admission felt like pulling splinters from my heart, painful but necessary. But watching you celebrate the most important moment of your young life without me, that woke something up. Emily closed the memory box carefully, as if it contained something sacred. What are you going to do? She asked. Her voice carried a mixture of fear and anticipation, the tone of someone who finally understood that actions have consequences, that family dynamics can shift as suddenly as weather. I looked at my granddaughter, really looked at her, seeing not just the child I'd loved unconditionally, but the woman she was becoming, capable of making her own choices about justice and love. I'm going to remind everyone what they chose to forget, I said. But first I need to know something, Emily. When you look at me now, knowing what you know, who do you see? Her answer would determine not just our future relationship, but the kind of woman she was choosing to become. Emily's answer came without hesitation. I see my grandmother, the woman who taught me that gardens grow best when someone cares enough to get their hands dirty, the woman who always had time for my questions, even the silly ones, the woman I should have fought for instead of believing convenient lies. Her voice grew stronger with each word, and I recognized something of my own determination in her expression. I want to make this right, Grandma. All of it. Emily pulled out her phone with the decisiveness of her generation. I'm calling off the engagement party do-over they planned for next weekend. I'm telling everyone the truth about what happened, about how you were treated, and I'm asking you to help me plan my real engagement party, the one that honors our family's actual history, not the sanitized version Mum prefers. The weight of her words settled over me like a blanket I'd thought I'd lost forever. Emily, you don't have to choose sides. This isn't about creating more division in the family. But even as I said it, I knew that sometimes division is necessary before real healing can begin. Sometimes you have to break something completely before you can rebuild it on honest foundations. It's not about sides, Grandma. It's about truth. It's about acknowledging that you built something beautiful and deserve to be part of it. She stood up, and for a moment she looked exactly like Harold, that same determined set to her jaw when he'd made up his mind about something important. I'm going to arrange a family meeting. Everyone will be there. Mom, Dad, Uncle Robert, everyone. And you're going to tell them exactly what you told me. I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I'm scared, Grandma. What if they all turn on me too? I placed my hand over hers. Then you'll know you stood for the truth. And the truth has deep roots. She took a breath, nodded, and stood tall, like someone ready to weather any storm. As Emily prepared to leave, she turned back with one final question. The recordings, the documents, the photographs. What made you save all of this? What made you document everything so carefully? I smiled, remembering Harold's meticulous nature, his belief that love should leave evidence behind. Your grandfather used to say that the most important stories are the ones people try to forget. He wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, the truth would survive. I handed her the memory box. Now it's your turn to decide what survives, Emily. What story will you tell your children about what family really means? That night, after Emily left, I made one final decision that would change everything. The family meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon, in late spring, in the garden I'd planted with my own hands 37 years ago. Emily had insisted on the location, and for the first time in years, I walked through my own front gate as an invited guest. The roses were in full bloom, the jasmine perfumed the air, and the fountain Harold had built still bubbled peacefully in the corner. I brought nothing but the truth, the recordings, the photographs, the documents that proved what everyone had chosen to forget. As Harold's voice filled the garden through Emily's portable speaker, I watched my family's faces change. Surprise, recognition, and finally, something that looked like shame. Margaret cried when she heard Harold explaining his hopes for our shared future. David apologized with the sincerity of a man finally seeing his own reflection clearly. But the most beautiful moment came when Emily announced that she wanted to be married in the garden, surrounded by the roses I'd planted and tended, with Harold's fountain providing the music and me providing the blessing. This is where love lives in our family, she said. This is where it all began, and this is where it continues. I still live in my small apartment, but now I spend every Sunday in the garden, teaching Emily's fiancé how to care for the roses, showing potential great-grandchildren how to plant bulbs with patient hands. The garden has become what Harold always envisioned, a place where family gathers naturally, where love grows alongside the flowers, where stories are told and remembered instead of buried and forgotten. If this story touched something in your heart, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life or had to fight for your place in your own story, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. Leave a comment, hit that like button, and if you want to hear more stories about the quiet strength it takes to bloom again after you thought your growing season was over, please subscribe. There are so many of us carrying these untold stories, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're still here, still growing, still worthy of the space we take up in this world.